Two enormous earthen walls stand between the fourth largest city in the United States and a catastrophe. Not concrete, not steel, but 25 miles of compacted Texas earth built almost 80 years ago. Now they are moving. Not from an earthquake, not from a flood, but from sinking. They are bending in the middle. The ground itself, the very foundation they are built upon, is subsiding unevenly, creating stresses their 1940s designers could never have imagined. This is happening at a rate of up to 2 inches in just a few years. It is a slow, silent, invisible process discovered by satellite, confirmed by scientists, and now a source of grave concern for the engineers who watch over them. In 2009, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers quietly placed both the Addicks and Barker dams in their highest risk category. The classification was DSAC 1, extremely high risk, a designation reserved for structures where failure is a real and devastating possibility. The dams were a brilliant solution to a 1930s problem. They sit on what was once remote prairie west of Houston, guardians against the kind of flood that in December 1935 put the city's downtown underwater, killing 10 people and paralyzing the regional economy. For decades, they did their job in silence. They are dry reservoirs. Most of the year, they are nothing more than vast public parks and wildlife habitats. George Bush Park, Bear Creek Pioneers Park. Thousands of acres of sports fields and hiking trails. They exist only to catch water during biblical rain events. But Houston did not remain a distant city. It grew, explosively, in the 70 years since the dams were completed. The city metastasized, sprawling west, right up to the edges of the reservoir lands, and then inside them. Thousands of homes, entire subdivisions, were built on land the government had acquired for the explicit purpose of being flooded. The city had outgrown its own defenses. It's hard to imagine something like this happening today, but it did. Curious what you think about that, actually. Let me know in the comments. To understand the impossible position this created, you have to go to August 2017. You have to understand Hurricane Harvey. As Harvey stalled over southeast Texas, it was not merely a storm. It was a weather event without precedent in American history. It dropped more than 50 inches of rain over the region. The Addicks and Barker reservoirs, designed for storms of the past, began to fill at a rate that terrified the engineers watching the gauges. They filled past their capacity, past 100%. The water levels kept rising, climbing the earthen embankments, threatening to overtop them. And then, for the first time in their history, water began to spill around the ends of the dams. Not a controlled release, an uncontrolled flow. This is the part the headlines do not capture. At the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Galveston District Headquarters, Colonel Lars Zetterstrom and his team were faced with a choice that no engineer ever wants to make. It has been called a Sophie's choice for civil engineering. Option 1. Do nothing. Let the reservoirs continue to fill. Hope the earthen walls hold. But if they failed, if an uncontrolled breach occurred, a wall of water would scour its way down Buffalo Bayou, wiping out the energy corridor, devastating Memorial City, and surging into downtown Houston and the Houston Ship Channel. The economic engine of the nation's energy sector would be crippled. The death toll would be unthinkable. The 2010 estimate for such a failure was over $60 billion in damage and more than 1 million people endangered. In 2017, the real numbers would have been far higher. Option 2. Take control. Open the floodgates. Send water downstream on purpose, knowing with absolute certainty that you will flood thousands of homes in the neighborhoods immediately below the dams. Sacrifice those homes, those communities, to save the dams themselves and prevent the far greater catastrophe of a total collapse. Colonel Zetterstrom had to make the call. He had to weigh the life of a city against the livelihoods of thousands. And on August 28, 2017, as the water lapped to the top of the dams, the decision was made. The gates were opened. A combined flow of over 13,000 cubic feet per second began pouring into Buffalo Bayou, a flow rate equivalent to a major river. They chose to save Houston from the dams by flooding it with them. Zetterstrom was blunt in his assessment. It's going to be better to release the water through the gates, he said, than for it to go over the spillway. Meanwhile, as they released water downstream, the lake behind the dams kept rising, backing up into the neighborhoods that were built inside the reservoir in the first place, flooding thousands more homes from the other direction. It was a perfect storm of engineering limits and historical planning failures. For a long time, this was the story. A story of a record storm, an impossible choice, and the consequences of a city that grew too fast. But it is not the whole story. A new, more insidious threat was hiding in the data. A problem not of water, but of earth. A problem of geology colliding with 80-year-old engineering. Now, here is the part nobody is putting on the news. The ground under Houston is sinking. This process called subsidence has been happening for a century. Massive extraction of groundwater for municipal and industrial use has caused the clay-rich soils to compact. Some parts of the region have sunk by as much as 10 feet since the 1920s. For years, it was assumed the sinking was happening more or less uniformly. But in August of 2020, a new study shattered that assumption. Dr. Shuhab Khan, a professor at the University of Houston, and his team used a technique called satellite-based radar interferometry, or INSAR. It's a method of comparing radar images from space, taken at different times to detect millimeter-scale changes in ground elevation. What they found was alarming. The Addicks and Barker dams were not sinking uniformly. They were experiencing differential subsidence. Parts of the long earthen structures were sinking faster than other parts. Between 2011 and 2017, the years leading right up to Hurricane Harvey, some segments of the dams moved downward by as much as 5 centimeters, about 2 inches. Relative to other segments, the dams weren't just sinking, they were bending. To understand why this is so dangerous, you have to picture the dams themselves. Addicks is over 11 miles long. Barker is over 13 miles long. They are not rigid concrete walls. They are massive, carefully engineered embankments of rolled earth fill. They are designed to use their immense weight and structure to hold back water pressure. But they were designed in the 1940s with the assumption that their foundations were stable. An earthen embankment that is 11 miles long cannot simply bend by 2 inches in the middle without consequence. This differential movement induces shear stress. It creates tension and compression within the structure. Forces the original design never accounted for. Our results indicate that the ground is sinking. Dr. Khan stated, and the rates are not the same all along the dams. This is new information for the Army Corps of Engineers, and something they have to consider. It was a brand new variable in an already high-stakes equation. The very ground that was supposed to support the city's most critical flood defenses was slowly, silently trying to break them apart. The story of how Houston arrived at this point is a story of action and reaction. It begins on December 8, 1935. A storm system stalled over the region, dumping torrents of rain. Buffalo Bayou, the city's main waterway, swelled over its banks and poured into the streets of downtown Houston. The water rose so fast that people were trapped in office buildings. The Houston Chronicle reported that the downtown area was a vast lake. Power was out, communications were cut, and the damage was estimated in the millions. It was a wake-up call. The city, built on a flat coastal plain webbed with bayous, was fundamentally vulnerable. The cry went out for federal help, and Washington responded. In 1938, Congress authorized the Flood Control Act, which greenlit the construction of 2 massive retention reservoirs west of the city. Construction on Barker Dam finished in 1945, with Addicks following in 1948. The total cost was around $16.5 million. In today's money, that's roughly $200 to $300 million, a bargain considering the multi-billion-dollar catastrophe they were designed to prevent. For a generation, the plan worked. The dams sat empty, their vast flood pools of over 27,000 acres serving as a quiet buffer. But Houston entered its boom years. Oil, space, and medicine fueled explosive growth. The city's population doubled, then doubled again. And all those people needed somewhere to live. Developers, driven by a voracious market, pushed relentlessly westward. They built right up to the edge of the government-owned reservoir land. And then they kept going. Why was land inside a federally designated flood pool available for development? The answer is a complex mix of jurisdictional oversight and, frankly, a failure of imagination. Few people believed the reservoirs would ever reach their absolute maximum capacity. FEMA flood maps, the documents that mortgage lenders use to assess risk, failed to show the true danger to thousands of properties. Homebuyers, many from out of state, had no idea their dream home was sitting at the bottom of a bowl designed to hold water. They were living in an accidental park, an area that was only dry because the worst-case scenario had not yet happened. If you're finding this deep dive interesting, you can subscribe for more videos like this. I try to uncover the stories that get missed. The warnings did not come all at once. They came like a series of tremors before the earthquake. In 1983, Tropical Storm Alicia tested the dams. In 2001, Tropical Storm Allison brought historic rainfall, filling the reservoirs to levels that raised eyebrows among engineers. Then the pace quickened. The Memorial Day flood in May 2015 pushed the water to then record levels. Less than a year later, the tax day flood of April 2016 did it again. It was a 1-2 punch that battered the aging structures. Matthew Zeeve, the director of operations for the Harris County Flood Control District, has been clear about the stakes. The Addicks and Barker dams and reservoirs are the most critical pieces of flood damage reduction infrastructure in all of Harris County, he has stated publicly. They're protecting hundreds of thousands of people and billions of dollars in property. After the 2015 and 2016 floods, the concern was palpable. The Army Corps of Engineers had already moved the dams to their extremely high-risk classification back in 2009, citing not the capacity, but the integrity of the outlet works, the gates and conduits at the bottom of the dams. Years of seepage had raised fears of erosion that could undermine the structures from within, a phenomenon known as piping, which can lead to a sudden catastrophic failure. In response, a $75 million project to replace the aging outlet structures began in 2015. It was a critical and necessary upgrade, but it was surgery to fix one problem while another, larger problem was looming. The project was still underway when Hurricane Harvey arrived. The new gates weren't even fully operational. And then there is the existential question. The city is facing a compounding crisis. The storms are getting stronger and more frequent. Judge Ed Emmett, the Harris County judge during Harvey, was correct when he famously declared it a new normal for rainfall. The city's own growth has put more people and property in harm's way than ever before. And now, the very ground itself is sinking beneath the city's primary defense against that new normal. The $75 million repair on the outlet gates was completed in 2020. Colonel Timothy Vail, who succeeded Zetterstrom as the USACE Galveston District Commander, oversaw the project's completion. It significantly reduced the risk of failure from the specific kind of seepage that had worried engineers for a decade. The dams are, in that one specific way, safer than they were before Harvey. But the Army Corps of Engineers is the first to admit this does not solve the fundamental problem. The dams are still too small for a Harvey-sized storm. Their design capacity was based on 1940s rainfall data, not the deluges of the 21st century. And the repair did nothing to address the newly discovered issue of differential subsidence. The dams are still bending. The stress is still accumulating. The situation has forced a radical rethinking of Houston's entire flood control strategy. Simply reinforcing the old dams is no longer enough. The problem is too big, the scale of the rainfall is too immense. This realization led to the launch of the Buffalo Bayou and Tributaries Resiliency Study, or BBTRS, in 2021. It's a $6 million multi-year deep dive by the Army Corps of Engineers to find a permanent large-scale solution. And the leading proposal to emerge from this study is something straight out of science fiction. A network of massive, deep tunnels. We're talking tunnels up to 40 or 50 feet in diameter, burrowed through the earth hundreds of feet below the city. The concept is to intercept floodwater upstream of the Addicks and Barker reservoirs, capture it before it ever reaches the dams, and shunt it through these subterranean expressways directly to the Houston Ship Channel, bypassing Buffalo Bayou and the heart of the city entirely. It is an audacious, breathtakingly ambitious plan. It is also breathtakingly expensive. Preliminary cost estimates range from $13 billion to over $30 billion. That's more than 100 times the original cost of the dams, adjusted for inflation. It would be one of the largest and most complex public works projects in American history. It's the kind of project you undertake when every other option has been exhausted. Send this to a friend who lives in a major city. It's a story many people don't know about is happening right beneath their feet. The tunnel proposal highlights the sheer scale of the dilemma. Can a city, can a nation, afford a $30 billion solution to protect one metropolitan area? But the counter question is even more stark. Can they afford not to? The next Harvey is not a question of if, but when. And with the dams sinking and bending, the margin for error is shrinking with every passing year. The Army Corps, along with the Harris County Flood Control District, has enhanced its monitoring. More sensors are on the dams. Satellite surveillance is constant, tracking the subsidence in near real time. But monitoring is not a solution. It is simply watching the problem get worse, 1 millimeter at a time. The current Harris County judge, Lena Hidalgo, who took office after Harvey, is now tasked with navigating these monumental decisions, balancing immediate repair needs with the pursuit of a long-term, astronomically expensive fix. The story is not over. The final recommendations from the BBTRS study are expected within the next couple of years. Then will come the political battle for funding. Meanwhile, the city of Houston holds its breath with every approaching storm front. The dams, those silent guardians on the prairie, are no longer just protectors. They are patients. They are aging, stressed, and carrying wounds both visible and invisible. The water from the next big storm will pour into the reservoirs, and the engineers will once again watch the gauges climb, this time with the added knowledge that the very earth beneath their feet is an active part of the threat. The choice they face will be the same as the one Colonel Zetterstrom faced in 2017, but the stakes will be higher. The dams will be older. They will have bent a little more. It is a slow-motion crisis unfolding on a geological timescale, but intersecting with the violent, rapid timescale of hurricanes. There is no easy answer. There is no cheap solution. There is only the rain, the bayous, the sinking ground, and the two long lines of Texas earth that stand in the way. 3 questions hang over the Harris County Flood Control District tonight. How much more can these 80-year-old structures bend before they break? Will a multi-billion-dollar solution be approved and built before the next new normal storm arrives? And what does it mean for one of America's most dynamic cities to be fundamentally at war with its own geography? The satellite data continues to stream down, converted into colored maps showing millimeters of displacement. The ground beneath the western suburbs of Houston continues its slow, inexorable compaction, a process that began decades ago and will not stop. And somewhere in the core of those 25 miles of earth, invisible stresses are building, a response to a subtle tilting that no one can see but everyone in authority now knows is happening. The rains will come again, the reservoirs will fill. And somewhere in an office in Galveston, an engineer will be watching a screen, knowing the water is pushing against a structure that is simultaneously being pulled apart from below.